Why did no one notice her when she entered the room? And why did that feel intentional? The command center breathed like a living thing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to remind everyone inside that survival here was borrowed, not guaranteed. Beneath miles of black ocean, every breath was permission granted by machines. Every heartbeat depended on equations written long before any of them were born. She stood where the light from the tactical display barely reached, not hiding, not trying to be seen, just present, gray fatigues, no insignia, no name patch. A woman most people would forget moments after passing her in a hallway. That was the point. Around her, men moved with practiced confidence. Operators, engineers, security, every one of them trained to react, to dominate their environment, to control outcomes through force or precision. They spoke in clipped phrases, joked quietly, carried themselves like men who believed the world bent when they pushed. None of them pushed her way. She had been on the station for 2 days. 2 days of silence. 2 days of watching patterns instead of people. They'd been told she was an oversight analyst, a civilian, Fleet Command's way of checking boxes without getting their hands dirty. The resentment came easily. Commander Thorne didn't hide his. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room the way pressure filled a sealed chamber. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, a voice that had never learned how to ask. To him, she was an insult, a suggestion that his world needed supervision. When the first alert chimed, soft, procedural, he moved instantly, not because it mattered, but because everyone was watching. "I'll handle this," he said, already taking the chair. The words weren't arrogance, they were habit. She didn't look at him. She looked at the data no one else noticed. Her fingers twitched once behind her back, a tell so small even she almost missed it. Something was wrong. But she said nothing, because she'd learned long ago that truth, spoken too early, often died unheard. Why did his smirk feel rehearsed? And why did her silence unsettle the one man who thrived on control? The alert faded. Green lights returned. Relief rippled through the room like a shallow exhale. Thorne enjoyed that moment. He lived for it. When she stepped toward the secondary console, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't defiant. It was practical, like stepping closer to hear a whisper. "The waveform had a precursor," she said, calm, even, almost gentle. "That isn't normal." Thorne blocked her view without thinking. Instinct, territory. "We have protocols," he replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Designed by people who understand these systems." A few smiles, a few nods. She met his eyes then, not challenging, not submissive. Empty. It was worse than anger. She nodded once and walked away. No argument, no embarrassment, no retreat. Just patience. Chief Davies noticed. He always did. He'd spent decades listening to machines fail before they screamed. He recognized that same tension in her stillness, the kind that didn't belong to fear, but to calculation. He almost spoke up. Almost. Then the station screamed. Not with sound, with force. The deck plates heaved, lights exploded, gravity lost its meaning, men fell, consoles shattered. Somewhere deep in the structure, metal twisted like bone breaking. This wasn't a tremor. This was judgment. Thorne shouted orders that couldn't be followed. His voice cracked, not from injury, from irrelevance. Systems died faster than commands could be given. And then, in the middle of it, she moved. No panic, no hesitation. Purpose. She didn't run to the center. She went to the forgotten panel, the one no one touched because no one believed they'd ever need it. Her hand spoke a language the station still understood. Code stripped of ceremony, authority without volume. "Chief Davies," she said, and he moved before his fear could speak. When Thorne grabbed her shoulder, she didn't flinch. "Get out of my way," she said quietly. "You're wasting oxygen." Why did her voice carry more weight than his rank ever had? Because truth does not negotiate. She spoke of waves and frequencies and death with the calm of someone who had already mourned the outcome and chosen to fight anyway. Her fear wasn't of chaos. It was of numbers she knew too well. When the station survived, improbably, impossibly, silence followed. Not relief. Reckoning. Thorne stood empty-handed in a world that no longer needed him. And when the call finally came from the surface, she didn't accuse. She didn't defend herself. She let the data speak. Because it always did. When Fleet Command said the word Admiral, no one cheered. They just understood. Why did power finally feel quiet? And why did that terrify the man who once owned the room? Thorne disappeared into quarters like a shadow, ashamed of the light. The crew didn't celebrate, they worked, differently now, with intention, with humility. She stayed among them, crawled through access tunnels, burned her hands on overheated panels, fixed what could be fixed. No speeches. No reminders. Only results. When Davies finally asked how she'd stayed calm, she told him the truth. I was terrified, she said, but not of dying. She feared what would happen if she didn't act. She feared becoming another commander who trusted ego over evidence. Her father had taught her that, and the ocean had proven him right. The story traveled as stories always do, softly, honestly. Not about heroics, about restraint, about listening, about dignity that doesn't announce itself. Sometimes strength doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it waits. And when it finally speaks, the world survives to hear it. Why did her hands start shaking only after the station stopped falling apart? The silence that followed survival was heavier than the chaos that came before it. It pressed in from every direction, filling the command center with something no alarm could name. Men stood where they had frozen, blinking slowly, like survivors pulled from wreckage who hadn't yet been told they were alive. She noticed her hands then. Not during the calculations. Not while the hull screamed. Not when death had been 30 seconds away. Now, a faint tremor ran through her fingers as she rested them against the cold metal edge of the console. She curled them into a fist and forced them still. Fear always arrived late for her. It waited until the math was finished, until there was space for emotion to exist without killing anyone. Around her the station exhaled. Systems rebooted in fragments. Emergency lights hummed. Somewhere deep below, water pressed patiently against wounded steel, waiting for permission to come inside. She didn't give it that permission. Status, she said quietly. No one hesitated. The young watch officer swallowed. Hull integrity holding. Minor seepage in gamma sector, pressure stabilizing. Good, she replied, not praise, confirmation. She turned away from the screens and finally allowed herself to feel the ache in her knees, the tightness in her chest. Adrenaline drained slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore. With it came something more dangerous than fear. Memory. For a moment the command center blurred into another room. Larger, brighter, filled with the smell of polished wood and old books. Her father stood at the center of that memory, sleeves rolled up, chalk dust on his fingers, eyes sharp with the same intensity she'd seen reflected back at her in the maintenance panel's glass. Never fall in love with being right, he'd said once. Fall in love with being correct. She pushed the thought away. This wasn't about him. It never was. That was the lie she told herself whenever his voice surfaced uninvited. She moved through the wreckage, stepping over broken panels, checking readouts by touch when screens refused to respond. Crew members parted instinctively, not out of fear now, but uncertainty. They didn't know what she expected of them. That was fine. Neither did she. Expectations were luxuries. Commander Thorne watched from the far side of the room. He hadn't moved much since the impact. Blood dried at his temple, forgotten. His hands hung uselessly at his sides, fingers flexing as if searching for a weapon that no longer existed. He had survived combat zones, ambushes, missions that would never be written down. But this had stripped him bare. He had always believed command was about presence, about being the loudest voice in the storm, about bending chaos through force of will. She hadn't raised her voice once. That truth gnawed at him more painfully than the humiliation. When she passed him, close enough that he could smell the faint ozone on her clothes, he opened his mouth. Words crowded forward, excuses, justifications, something that would put him back where he belonged. Nothing came out. She didn't look at him. Not out of cruelty. Out of irrelevance. Why did that hurt more than anger ever could? Repairs began in earnest once the immediate danger faded. Teams moved under her direction, though she rarely gave direct orders. Instead, she asked questions, precise ones. What does that sensor usually read under load? How long since that valve was last cycled? What assumption is this system making right now? The engineers responded instinctively, thinking out loud, filling gaps with knowledge they didn't realize they possessed until someone asked the right question. She listened more than she spoke, corrected only when necessary. Authority, she knew, wasn't about control. It was about alignment. Chief Davies found himself watching her when he should have been working, not because she demanded attention, but because she bent the room around her without trying. He'd spent a lifetime around brilliant people, loud ones, eccentric ones, arrogant ones. She was different. Her brilliance didn't need witnesses. At one point, as they worked side by side reconnecting a scorched junction box, he finally asked, "You knew, didn't you?" She didn't pretend not to understand. "I suspected." "How early?" She paused, fingers hovering over a bundle of wires. "Before the first alert." He exhaled slowly. "And you didn't say anything?" "No," she agreed. That answer carried weight, not defensiveness, not regret. "Just fact." Davies hesitated. "Why?" She finished the connection and sealed the panel before replying. "Because truth doesn't survive first contact with pride." He thought of Thorne, of the smirk, of the way the commander had dismissed her without even understanding what she was pointing at. Davies nodded. He understood now, and that understanding came with an uncomfortable realization. They hadn't almost died because of the quake. They'd almost died because of a man who couldn't listen. Hours later, when the first stable comms channel crackled to life, the station gathered again in the command center. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what this moment meant. Narratives were about to be formed. Careers would rise or collapse based on what happened next. Thorne straightened his uniform. He rehearsed his tone in his head, calm, controlled, commanding. He needed this. When Fleet Commander Marcus appeared on screen, exhaustion lined his face. "Report," he demanded. "We lost your signal." Thorne stepped forward before anyone else could move. He spoke carefully, truth adjacent, hero adjacent, framed himself as the center gravity around which survival had occurred. She let him. That was the part no one expected. She stood just outside the camera's view, hands clasped behind her back, eyes on the data stream still scrolling across a secondary monitor. She could see everything now, the deviations, the delays, the moments where his decisions had worsened the crisis. She said nothing, until Marcus asked about the black box. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally, just enough. And when Marcus looked at her, really looked, something shifted. Recognition, memory, respect. When the word Admiral finally landed, it didn't explode. It settled. Thorne felt it like gravity reasserting itself. After the transmission ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent. She closed her eyes briefly. Not in triumph, in exhaustion. She hadn't wanted this moment. Not the reveal, not the authority. Those were consequences, not goals. What she wanted was simpler. She wanted a world where people listened before lives were lost. Later, alone in a narrow observation corridor overlooking the black nothing of the ocean, she allowed herself something she rarely did. Grief. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet ache for a man who had taught her that dignity didn't announce itself, and paid for that lesson with his life. She rested her palm against the glass. "We're still here," she whispered, "not to the ocean, to the memory." And somewhere deep beneath the waves, the numbers remained silent. Waiting. Why did the quiet finally start to feel heavier than the fear ever had? The station entered a strange, fragile rhythm after that. Not peace, not recovery, something in between. A held breath that lasted hours, then days. Systems came back online one by one, each successful reboot followed by a pause, as if the metal itself was waiting to see whether it was safe to trust them again. She slept in short intervals, 20 minutes here, 40 there. Her body obeyed necessity, not comfort. Every time she closed her eyes, numbers surfaced behind her eyelids, waveforms, pressure tolerances, cascading failure trees. She welcomed them. Numbers were honest. They didn't wake you with regret. The crew watched her more closely now. Not openly, not in a way that could be called starring, but she felt it, the subtle recalibration of attention. When she entered a compartment, conversations shifted. When she spoke, people leaned in without realizing they were doing it. Respect is rarely loud when it's real. She didn't correct them, didn't distance herself either. She stayed where she'd always been, inside the work, crawling through maintenance shafts, standing shoulder to shoulder with engineers who still smelled faintly of fear and burnt insulation. If anyone expected her to step back now that her authority was official, they quickly learned otherwise. Leadership, she believed, wasn't elevation. It was proximity. Commander Thorne remained confined to quarters. Officially, it was medical observation. Unofficially, everyone understood. His presence had become disruptive, not because he argued. He didn't. Not anymore. He had gone quiet in a way that made people uncomfortable. Silence could mean discipline, or it could mean collapse. On the third day, she requested his presence in the command center. The message was delivered without ceremony, no escort, no warning. Thorne arrived 10 minutes later, clean uniform, fresh cut sealed, spine straight, eyes dull. He stopped 3 steps inside the room. She didn't turn around. "Commander," she said. "Not former, not disgraced, not yet." "Yes, ma'am." The word caught in his throat. She studied the main display for a moment longer, then finally faced him. The room seemed to shrink slightly, as if unwilling to host the exchange. "You were effective in combat environments," she said. "Your record reflects that." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "This station," she continued, "is not a combat environment." "No," he said quietly. She waited, let the silence do its work. "I failed," he said at last. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't self-pity. It was acknowledgement. She accepted it with a small nod. "You failed to listen." "Yes." "You confused confidence with certainty." Another pause. "Yes." She didn't soften, but she didn't sharpen either. Her voice remained even, measured. "Failure isn't disqualifying," she said. "Refusal to learn is." For the first time since the quake, something flickered behind his eyes. Not hope, not relief. Understanding. "You'll be transferred once relief arrives," she said. "Your future will be decided elsewhere." He swallowed. "And my present?" "You'll assist Chief Davies," she replied. "Under supervision, no command authority." It was, in many ways, a mercy. He nodded again, understood. As he turned to leave, she added, "Commander." He stopped. "You were right about one thing." He waited. "This station does need protection," she said, "just not the kind you were trained to provide." He left without speaking. She exhaled only after the door sealed behind him. That conversation stayed with her longer than she expected. Not because of him. Because of herself. She had seen that version of arrogance before, not in Thorn, but in echoes of her past, in commanders who mistook decisiveness for infallibility, in systems that rewarded volume over accuracy, in moments where she herself had nearly spoken too soon or too late. The difference, she reminded herself, was discipline. Still, the doubt lingered. That night, as she sat alone reviewing seismic forecasts, Chief Davies joined her quietly. He didn't ask permission. She didn't send him away. "Station's stable," he said, "as stable as it gets." "For now," she replied. He hesitated. "You didn't have to give him that chance." She didn't look up. "Yes, I did." Davies frowned slightly. "After everything." "After everything," she interrupted gently, "is when it matters most." She finally met his eyes. "This isn't about punishment, it's about correction. The system only improves if people inside it are allowed to." Davies nodded slowly. "Your father thought the same way." The name hung between them. She didn't flinch. That surprised her. "He taught me that removing a person doesn't remove a problem," she said. "It just hides it." Davies considered that. "And what about you, Admiral?" She raised an eyebrow. "What about me?" "You put yourself here, alone, unannounced, no rank, no buffer." He chose his words carefully. "That's not standard." "No," she agreed. "Why?" She leaned back, eyes returning to the data. "Because systems behave differently when they think no one is watching." Davies almost smiled. "Almost." The next tremor came 2 days later. Smaller, sharper, deceptive. This time, alarms triggered correctly, protocols engaged smoothly. The crew responded without panic. She watched it unfold from the periphery, heart steady, mind alert. It worked. Not because she intervened. Because they listened. When it passed without incident, a quiet pride settled over the room. Not celebration, something deeper, earned. She felt it too. Then came the message from Fleet Command. Not operational, personal. She read it alone. Condolences, commendations, words chosen carefully by people who had never met her father but knew his name carried weight. She closed the message without replying. That night, sleep refused to come. She found herself back at the observation window, staring into the endless black. The ocean didn't reflect her face. It never did. It absorbed light without acknowledgement. Her father had loved that about the sea. "It doesn't care who you are," he'd said, "only what you do." She rested her forehead against the glass. She was proud of what she'd done here. That frightened her. Pride was dangerous. She knew that better than most. But this pride wasn't about being right. It was about restraint. About waiting. About trusting truth to surface without force. She straightened and turned away. Tomorrow she would begin restructuring station protocols. Quietly, methodically, without spectacle. Change didn't need witnesses. Only results. And somewhere deep beneath the station, the tectonic plates continued their slow, indifferent dance, reminding her of the lesson that never aged. The world does not reward those who shout the loudest. It rewards those who listen long enough to act when it finally matters. Why did she feel the weight of command most when no one was watching? The days blurred into a pattern of work and quiet observation, not the comfortable kind of routine that lulled people into complacency, but a deliberate rhythm, measured, alert, always aware that stability was temporary. The station functioned again mostly. Power flows stabilized. Hull stress normalized within acceptable margins. The ocean remained where it belonged. For now, she spent long hours alone, reviewing logs that no one else wanted to touch. The ugly ones, near misses buried under procedural language, decisions justified after the fact, patterns of behavior that didn't trigger alarms but should have. This was the part of command no one romanticized, no one applauded. It was also the part that mattered most. She found herself thinking about her father again, not in sharp flashes of grief, but in quieter, more dangerous ways. In questions, in comparisons, in wondering whether he would have made the same choices she was making now, or whether he would have seen something she'd missed. That doubt followed her everywhere. She didn't share it. An admiral could afford many things. Visible uncertainty was not one of them. When Fleet Command sent a delegation to assess the station, she met them at the hatch. 3 officers, crisp uniforms, eyes scanning for damage they could report upward or blame downward. They were polite, respectful, careful with their words now that her rank was no longer theoretical. She walked them through the station herself. Not the polished sections, not the restored command center. She took them to the scarred corridors, the sealed compartments still holding pressure, the emergency systems that had barely worked but had worked enough. "This is where we failed," she said calmly. One of the officers frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, the station survived." "Yes," she replied, "that doesn't mean we succeeded." They exchanged glances. She continued walking. "This station was designed to withstand predictable threats," she said. "What nearly killed us wasn't unpredictable. It was ignored." She stopped at a reinforced bulkhead, palm resting against cold steel. Complacency is quieter than negligence. That's why it's more dangerous. No one argued. They couldn't. Later, alone again, she wondered whether she'd gone too far, whether exposing vulnerability, structural, procedural, human, would invite resistance from above. Institutions disliked mirrors. But she didn't regret it. If command was anything, it was responsibility for truths that made people uncomfortable. Chief Davies found her in the systems bay that evening, sitting on an overturned crate, boots dangling inches above the deck. She was staring at a disassembled control unit, pieces spread out like a puzzle she had no intention of solving yet. "You've been avoiding your quarters," he said gently. She didn't deny it. "They're too quiet." He nodded. He understood that kind of quiet. "The delegation's report will be interesting." That's one word for it. "They'll push back." "I expect them to." Davies studied her face. "Does that worry you?" She considered the question. "No." Then, after a beat, "It exhausts me." That admission surprised both of them. She rarely spoke about fatigue, not because she didn't feel it, but because acknowledging it felt like indulgence. Still, the words were out now, hanging in the air between them. Davies smiled faintly. "That's how I know you're doing it right." She raised an eyebrow. "Bad leaders get energized by control," he said. "Good ones get tired by responsibility." She huffed softly. "That's not very comforting." "No," he agreed, "but it's accurate." That night she finally returned to her quarters. Small, Spartan, a bed she rarely used, a desk bolted to the wall, no personal effects. She had never unpacked, never felt the need. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed her boots slowly, deliberately. Her hands ached now, knees stiff, a body reminding her that discipline didn't make her immune to time. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. Sleep came in fragments. When it broke, it did so violently. She was back in the barren sea. The memory she avoided more carefully than any classified file. Not the explosion, not the alarms. The argument. Her father standing across from a commander who smiled too easily. The way his voice had stayed calm while everything else spiraled. The way he'd looked at her just before the feed cut out. Not afraid. Disappointed. She woke with her heart racing, breath shallow. It took several seconds to orient herself, to remember that the station was intact, that she was alive, that this time the numbers had bent toward survival. She sat up and pressed her palms against her eyes until the image faded. This was the cost no report would mention. Morning came without ceremony. She buried herself in work again, revised protocols, reassigned responsibilities, quietly removed redundancies that existed only to preserve rank hierarchies, promoted technicians who asked questions instead of waiting for permission. Change rippled outward, subtle but undeniable. Some resisted. Most adapted. Commander Thorne, now assisting Davies, worked in silence. He followed instructions precisely, asked questions sparingly, listened more than he spoke. Once she caught him watching her from across the room, not with resentment, with something closer to humility. It unsettled her. Not because she doubted him, but because redemption stories were seductive, easy to believe in, dangerous to rely on. People didn't change because they were shamed. They changed because they understood. Whether that understanding lasted was another matter entirely. The next crisis didn't come from the earth. It came from above. A classified transmission arrived mid-cycle, high priority, encrypted beyond station clearance levels. She decrypted it alone. The message was brief, surgical, a problem elsewhere in the monitoring network, a data anomaly that mirrored the precursor harmonics she'd noticed days before, but on a global scale. It wasn't seismic. It was deliberate. Someone or something was probing the system, testing responses, watching how quickly humans trusted green lights. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but recognition. Patterns always repeated. She convened a limited briefing. No theatrics, no urgency that would bleed into panic, just facts. "We're being watched," she said, "not by an enemy we can shoot, by one that wants to know whether we'll ignore what doesn't fit our expectations." Eyes narrowed, back straightened. She continued, "We don't respond yet, we observe, we verify, we assume nothing." Davies leaned forward, "And if command pushes for action?" She met his gaze, "Then we push back." Silence followed. Then nods. Not obedience. Trust. Later, standing alone once more at the tactical display, she felt it again, that weight, the invisible pressure of knowing that every decision now rippled beyond this station. That restraint could save lives, that hesitation could cost them. Command wasn't about certainty. It was about carrying doubt without letting it paralyze you. She placed her hands behind her back, posture relaxed, balanced. The same stance she'd held when no one had known who she was, when they'd dismissed her, when they'd underestimated the quiet. She allowed herself a small, private thought. Her father would have liked this moment. Not the authority, the responsibility. And as the data streams flowed steadily across the screens, she remained still, listening to the silence between the numbers, knowing that dignity didn't announce itself. It waited, and when it acted, it did so without asking for permission. Why did the most dangerous moment arrive without alarms, without noise, without warning? It began with absence. No alerts, no flashing indicators, no sudden spike that demanded attention. Just a gap. She noticed it while reviewing the overnight data streams alone, long before anyone else would have. A missing return, a pause where there should have been noise, the kind of silence that didn't belong to nature. Her shoulders tightened. Silence, she knew, was never empty. It was occupied by intent. She reran the feed, once, twice, slower, then raw. There it was again. A patterned omission, subtle enough to be dismissed as sensor drift, clean enough to look accidental, familiar enough to feel wrong. She leaned back and closed her eyes. This wasn't a failure. This was a test. By the time the morning watch rotated in, she already had 3 models running in parallel. None of them were comforting. Whatever was probing the network wasn't interested in brute force. It wanted to understand behavior, reaction time, human assumptions. It wanted to know when people stopped questioning green lights. She called Davies in quietly. No overhead announcement. No urgency that would ripple outward before it needed to. "Look at this," she said, sliding the data toward him. He studied it for a long time, longer than most would have. When he finally looked up, his expression had hardened. "That's not noise," he said. "No, it's restraint." "Yes." Davies exhaled slowly. "That's not how machines usually behave." "No," she agreed, "but it's how people do." They didn't say the rest out loud. Someone had built this. The next hours were an exercise in discipline. Every instinct in the room pushed toward escalation, toward reporting upward, toward action that could be seen and acknowledged. She resisted all of it. "Observation only," she reminded them. "No changes to external behavior, no corrective signals." A junior analyst shifted uneasily. "Ma'am, if this is hostile." "Then reacting too early tells them exactly how to tune their approach," she replied calmly. She remembered another room, another debate, a commander laughing off warnings because nothing had exploded yet. She would not repeat that mistake. As the station continued its routine, the anomaly deepened. Gaps widened, then stabilized, then moved. Like a finger tracing the outline of a door. She felt the weight of it settle in her chest, not fear, but responsibility. This wasn't just about one station anymore. This was about the network, about every blind spot humans pretended didn't exist because acknowledging them was inconvenient. Fleet Command checked in twice that day. She kept her reports factual, measured, incomplete by necessity. Trust was a fragile thing. You didn't spend it all at once. That night Thorne approached her. It was the first time he'd sought her out voluntarily. He stood at the threshold of the command center, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that mirrored her own. The irony didn't escape either of them. "Admiral," he said. She turned, waited. "I reviewed the patrol doctrines," he continued, "the way we respond to anomalies. And they assume intent equals aggression," he said. "This doesn't fit." "No," she replied, "it doesn't." He hesitated. Then, if this were an enemy I'd faced before, they'd already have struck. "Yes," she said again, "which means this isn't about damage." "It's about confidence," he said slowly, "about teaching us to trust what we shouldn't." She studied him, not his words, but the process that led him there. "You're learning," she said. He nodded once, no pride, no relief. Just acceptance. The anomaly peaked just before the artificial night cycle, a perfect silence across multiple nodes, brief, precise. She felt the room tense around her. "Hold," she said quietly. Seconds passed. Then the data returned. Unchanged. No breach, no corruption, no visible consequence. That was the most unsettling part. Davies rubbed his face. So what was the point? She didn't answer right away. Because the truth was heavier than any immediate threat. "They wanted to know whether we'd notice," she said finally, "and whether we'd panic if we did. And now," she straightened, hands folding behind her back once more, "now they know we're paying attention." She sent a message to Fleet Command then, not an alert, a recommendation. Audit assumptions, review anomaly dismissal thresholds, retrain analysts to distrust clean data more than messy data. She knew how it would be received. Slowly, skeptically, politically. That was fine. Change that lasted was always resisted first. Later, alone again, she allowed herself a moment of fatigue, not physical this time, moral. Being right wasn't enough. You had to be patient long enough for others to catch up without losing lives in the process. Her father had carried that burden too. She wondered briefly whether it had been heavier for him, or whether she was simply more aware of its cost. As days passed without further incident, tension eased. Too much. She saw it in posture, in laughter returning too quickly, in the way people began to trust the calm. She addressed it gently, not with warnings, with reminders. Stability is not safety, she told them once almost casually. They remembered. The final confirmation came a week later. Another station reported a breach, minor, contained, explained away as a software hiccup. She requested the raw data. The pattern matched. Someone else hadn't noticed the silence. Lives weren't lost. But something else was. Trust. She closed the file and stared at the tactical display, the steady flow of information reflecting faintly in her eyes. This was the real war, she realized. Not explosions, not battles, but attention. The fight to remain vigilant when nothing seemed wrong. She issued new directives fleet-wide that night, quiet ones, technical ones, the kind that never made headlines but rewired outcomes. As she finished, Davy spoke softly from behind her. They'll never know what didn't happen. She nodded, that's the point. She stood there long after the screens dimmed for night cycle, listening to the station breathe, to the ocean press harmlessly against reinforced steel. Victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt restrained, earned, and deeply lonely. But as she turned away, she carried with her the one certainty that mattered. Sometimes the bravest act isn't striking back. It's refusing to be fooled. Why did it feel harder to stand down than it ever had to step forward? The station never returned to the version it had been before her arrival. Even after repairs were complete, after systems ran clean and reports stacked neatly in Fleet Command archives, something fundamental had shifted. The air felt different, not lighter, sharper, as if everyone understood on some quiet level that safety was not a condition you achieved, but a discipline you practiced every day. She encouraged that understanding without numbing it. Her directives were subtle, small changes layered over time. Analysts were required to justify why data looked normal, not why it looked wrong. Engineers rotated roles more frequently, so no one grew blind to their own assumptions. Command simulations included scenarios with no visible enemy, no clear objective, no moment of obvious failure, only delayed consequences. Some officers hated those drills. She considered that a good sign. The probing stopped, or perhaps it simply moved on. She never claimed victory. She never assumed retreat. The absence of interference meant nothing by itself. It only meant that, for now, no one was pulling at the threads. That awareness never left her. One evening, as the station settled into its artificial night, she received a message marked personal. No encryption layers, no formal headers. Just a name. Marcus. She opened it alone. The fleet commander's tone was different here. Less granite, more human. He spoke of the official inquiry, how the black box data had changed more than one career trajectory, how certain command philosophies were being quietly reconsidered, how resistance was already forming in predictable places. Then he wrote the line that stayed with her. You've made enemies you'll never meet. That's the cost of what you're doing. She stared at the words longer than necessary. She'd known that already. She typed a brief reply. If they're arguing, they're thinking, that's enough. She closed the channel before he could respond. Later that night, she walked the outer observation ring alone. The lights were low. The glass curved outward into darkness so complete it felt like staring into the absence of time. The ocean didn't move the way people imagined. No waves, no drama. Just pressure, constant, indifferent. Her father had loved that about it. She rested her hand against the cold surface, grounding herself in the present. She thought of the child she'd been, sitting cross-legged on a war college floor, listening to officers argue over simulations, while her father quietly dismantled their certainty with a single question. What are you assuming and why? That question had shaped her life more than any order ever given. She felt tired then, not the exhaustion of crisis, but the deeper fatigue of sustained vigilance. The kind that came from knowing you could never fully rest, not if you cared about outcomes instead of appearances. She wondered how long she could carry it. The answer came, unexpectedly, from Commander Thorne. He requested a meeting 2 days before his transfer. She agreed. He entered her office with restraint that felt practiced now, not stiff, intentional. He stood until she gestured for him to sit. I won't pretend I understand everything you do, he said, but I understand what I did wrong. She waited. I thought leadership meant never hesitating, he continued. I thought doubt was weakness. And now, she asked. And now I think doubt is a signal, he said carefully. One you're supposed to listen to before it turns into fear. She nodded once. I don't expect forgiveness, he added. I'm not asking for it. I'm not offering it, she replied gently. That startled him. Forgiveness, she continued, is personal, this is professional. He absorbed that in silence. I will say this, she added. You're leaving this station better than you arrived. He met her eyes, because of you. No, she corrected, because you listened. That was the last conversation they had. When his transport departed, there was no ceremony. No one lined the corridors. No one needed to. He left quieter than he'd arrived. Smaller, perhaps, but more real. She watched the external feed until the vessel vanished into darkness. Then she turned back to work. Weeks passed. The station operated at peak efficiency, but she knew better than to mistake metrics for meaning. She stayed alert. She stayed present. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to step back. Not from responsibility. From visibility. She delegated more, trusted more, allowed the systems and the people to function without her constant proximity. She observed from a distance, testing whether what she'd built could survive without her. It could. That realization brought an unexpected ache. Purpose, she had learned, could be as addictive as adrenaline. The message came on a quiet cycle, just as she was preparing to leave the command center for the night. Fleet Command Final. Her reassignment orders. She read them once. Then again. Promotion confirmed, expanded authority, a new role overseeing multiple deep-sea monitoring stations, broader reach, greater influence, and less direct control. She sat with that for a long time. When Davies found her still there an hour later, he didn't ask what the message said. You're leaving, he said. Yes. When? Soon. He nodded, then surprised her by smiling. You did what you came here to do. Did I? She asked. He gestured around them. Look at the room. She did. The quiet was different now. It wasn't tense. It wasn't complacent. It was aware. She exhaled slowly. Take care of it. We will. She believed him. On her last night aboard the station, she stood once more at the tactical display, hands clasped behind her back, posture relaxed and balanced. The numbers flowed steadily, honest, unimpressed by rank or legacy. She felt no urge to correct them. She turned off the screen. In the corridor outside, the station hummed on, alive, resilient, watchful. As she walked toward the departure hatch, she didn't look back. Some legacies weren't meant to be observed. They were meant to endure. And somewhere, far above the crushing pressure of the ocean, decisions would be made by people who might never know her name, but who would benefit from the discipline she left behind. That was enough. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't smirk. It simply acts quietly, precisely, and leaves the world standing when it might have fallen apart.